One. We are back with another episode of the MLS Aces Podcast. This is your host, Tom Sweezy, and we are here. We're trying to stick to the New Year's resolution, 2 episodes a week, and one of those episodes being an interview. And I think a amazing next guest to have on is Charles Boehm. You know his writing all at MLSsoccer.com. He covers things from MLS to the USMNT. I feel like every aspect of US soccer. So Charles, thank you for coming on, talking a little soccer with me today.
It's a pleasure, Tom. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So recently on MLSsoccer.com, you've been putting out a lot of articles, a lot of content about everything, but the stuff that I've been a little bit more attentive to is the USMNT coverage. I think everything from the games with Venezuela, obviously previewing Costa Rica. Just to give a little peek behind the curtains, we are recording this before the Costa Rica game. And obviously, I think Poch's comments and his viewpoint of the camp and everything like that. What do you make at a high level of what he's kind of maybe experimenting with, maybe his viewpoint of a not so traditional camp in terms of global soccer and, the MLS player point of view within all of that?
Well, it's interesting. The January camp is now, reaching middle age as a concept. It's been around for most of the last 3 decades. It has sort of gone in and out of fashion. Been viewed differently by different coaches and regimes. But it seems like even though you might expect, the original purpose of it. Well, sorry, I should clarify here. There's a whole history to it, and I won't get us sidetracked into the history of the January camp. But there was a time when the Gold Cup was a winter tournament. There were times when there were major events that necessitated, gathering at this time of year. So the earliest ones were actually, sort of not as driven by MLS, but over time, I think Bruce Arena was probably the one in his first tenure who centered it on the idea of getting MLS based USMNT players or USMNT prospects a chance to stay fit during what was once a very long off season, longer than most major leagues around the world. It's still a little bit longer, but you now have MLS clubs, particularly the ones that are starting their seasons earlier with CONCACAF Champions Cup, going into their their club preseasons around the same time that January camp is starting. So a lot of the players that are taking part in January camp this year, for example, are missing out on their club preseason, but to do so. So why do we still do it, right? Hasn't it outlived its usefulness if the MLS clubs are now gathering earlier and earlier in January? A few months ago, Jurgen Klinsmann did the Kicking It show on CBS and talked about how he certainly I think would have loved to make the thing go away, and kind of threw a bunch of stuff at the wall as is his wont. He and I'm not sure all of it totally a heads up, but it was interesting because he talked about he was told that the TV contracts necessitated a January camp because you had to have those games. Although that doesn't totally square with me because sometimes there's one game, sometimes there's 2 games. I don't really know, if it's a premium event from the perspective of the television networks. But anyway, he also admitted, even as he said, that he would have loved to not do it. That's how he first spotted Jeff Cameron, that you can see some up and coming young talent. And so I wasn't sure how Pochettino would react to this, but he has absolutely raved about the concept repeatedly in both English and Spanish in multiple media availabilities now. Yesterday, speaking in Spanish in the Matchday -1 press conference, he said it has incalculable value because he can look at these players, he and his staff can look at these players at their clubs and study in detail what they're doing at that level, but that's doesn't come close to working with them face to face in person in an extensive 2.5 week camp like this. And then the matches give, that much more of a data set, I think, for him and his staff to examine these players and learn about them. And I think he's really emphasized how much quality he sees. It's clear to me now that he's really eager to stoke competition. And it's part of the bigger mentality conversation that he's, I think has spent a lot of time on. Trying to bring that sort of Argentine garra, to the tenacity and the competitive spirit. And I think he wants that to filter that into all levels and all contexts of the program. I think he's sending a very clear message to the players who we think of as first choice over in the big European leagues right now, to remind them that there's a deeper player pool than in past years and decades, and that he wants to stoke that competition. So that's very, very interesting. And I think you could even argue that the global soccer is actually coming around to January camp very belatedly, because Costa Rica is going to play their first game later today against the U.S. It's their first game under Piojo Herrera. There's other national team coaches, I think, that are seeing the value in gathering something like this, even if it's not your first choice squad, even if it's outside of FIFA window. Every bit of FaceTime you can get, every touch point you can get with your players in such a congested international soccer calendar has some level of value.
I mean, I agree to the point even outside of soccer, right? Like, I'm a corporate America person, right? You see that the return to office, because leadership, I think, wants more touch points, wants more in-person conversations, and there is a useful aspect to it. So I think even translating that over into the soccer world, of it's just more time with more players, more face-to-face conversation. How do you react to this? How does maybe this concept translate in your brain on the field, and how can we really kind of work that out? I think that's an amazing point, and something we've said on this podcast plenty of times is the aspect of competition. That I am a Greg Berhalter believer. I loved his time as manager of the USMNT, and I think he did some amazing things for the program. The one thing that I do think, though, is that towards the end, the aspect of competition wasn't always there. It always seemed like certain players were sharpied into the lineup, even if they weren't producing at the club level or whatnot, right? And I think that's one thing that, to your point, and what Pochettino has said, is that element of competition. And I feel like you almost saw that a little bit in the Venezuela game, that everyone's trying to up their game. Everyone's trying to stand out. Everyone's trying to do the things that clearly in training, they were trying to work on and impress Pochettino and his coaching staff with. One of those players to me was Patrick Agyemang. Obviously, I think from the large MLS pundits out there, they love Agyemang, the Agy God, every other nickname that you want to throw around for Patrick Agyemang. But to me, that was my standout player for the Venezuela game. Was there someone that stood out to you, or that Pochettino has maybe made some comments about, that you feel like deserves a little love in terms of this conversation and the larger conversation?
Yeah, listeners in Charlotte, please let us know. Is it Agyemang or is it Agyemang? Like, I don't know what the proper pronunciation is, but there's definitely he's inspiring stands with every passing appearance.
I mean, the guy scored.
Yeah, it's not that many people who've scored on their full international debut, and this is a guy who's already, I think, a Cinderella story in terms of coming out of nowhere and sort of having fallen outside of the typical talent identification funnels, that which have gotten a lot bigger and more effective in the United States over the last couple decades, but still there's tons of players under the radar outside of the traditional areas in which rising youth players are spotted and cultivated. So it's still cool that we have this big country with this chaotic system where a guy like him can not really be in the spotlight until latter college or MLS, and come up through the draft and not be well known. And I think I think he caught Pochettino's attention. I mean, he's still raw. I thought he showed the rawness in that Venezuela match with some of his hold up play and some of the challenges he had just with being, kind of clean at that elite level with his first touch and his ability to hold possession. But I'm going to read what Pochettino said about him yesterday, because I thought it was, Pochettino clearly, I think we're seeing that he's not entirely comfortable talking at length about individuals, especially not anything that could be perceived as criticizing.
Yeah.
But he did say, let's see, I'm sorry, I'm looking for it here. He has a really good profile as a striker, and for us, I think he can be very, very, very useful. That's 3 varies. He's still young. He still has room to improve, but his attitude, his condition are great. I am so happy with him, with the performance, attitude, and everything. And his performance is really, really good. I think he's capable to add a different condition to the team that sometimes we were missing a little bit. He's a very good alternative on the front for us. So that's like, even a guy who's trying his best to big up his players and be a positive presence in front of the cameras. I think you see there that maybe Poch is part of the Agyemang as well. He just has a really interesting skill set. I mean, he's a linebacker type of frame with top level athleticism. With the ability to do the traditional 9 things that you expect from someone with that kind of frame. But then he also loves to run at players. He's got a little bit of sauce to him with the ball at his feet. He was able to show that off on his goal. And who knows? I mean, the fun thing is, and I had a really interesting conversation with an FC Dallas scout a few weeks ago for a piece about how they work in the Super Draft, because FCD have done work over a long period of time now in the draft. And this is a Brazilian, Leobaldo, who talked about how when he first came to the United States, he didn't believe this idea that people told him, like, you still see talent that can be a successful professional in the 20s, right? Yeah. Someone who hasn't entered an elite professional environment until their college age or beyond, well into their 20s. And that's simply unheard of in world soccer, right? In most other countries, especially big development powerhouses that produce players in volume. And then he said, but it's true. Like you see these guys come through, and they had Logan Farrington, who was a good example of that last year. I think he would have been the rookie of the year if that award still existed. Mm-hmm. And I think you see that with Big Pat. You have this guy who is a little behind the curve or a late bloomer, but that's just kind of, on the one level, you could say that the development system didn't work in that case, but on the other, it's like, wow, there is still an alternate pathway. He still did get a chance to get to the bigger spotlight, and look what he's doing now. And now the question is, like, what is that trajectory like? Can it keep going upward? How high can it go? What's the ceiling? And for me, those kind of stories are fun.
No, I mean, I think that's what makes U.S. soccer unique and fun and special and weird. And I don't know. To me, I love being a weirdo and I love being a nerd of U.S. soccer, because you have a guy who's playing D3 soccer who's now, a few years later on a field scoring against Venezuela. Like that's an unbelievable story alone. And then obviously diving deeper into, the minutia of it all. It's unbelievable. And, I hope for his rise, and I hope, we see him scoring again against Costa Rica later on today. But speaking of that Costa Rica game, obviously, again, for the listeners, for the viewers, this is before the Costa Rica game has been played. But what are you looking for specifically in terms of what do you want to see? Obviously, it's a January camp. I don't think the results matter too much. You want to see, individual performances and team performances kind of gel a little bit. But is it more just kind of the same from the Venezuela game? Because for the most part, I think it was a pretty all around, good performance.
Yeah. So the Walker Zimmerman said what we would expect, that there will be, I think it was as they were getting ready to leave Miami and move up the road to Orlando, that there would be some changes in terms of the personnel and the lineups used. I'm always curious to see what that looks like. So how many, how comfortable is Pochettino with extensive rotation? Does he try to change as much as he can? A lot of coaches want to sort of limit the number of variables in order to keep to some level of coherence. So I think we'll probably see a couple of veterans like Zimmerman, maybe Ream stepping in and playing more. But then of course that also begs, examination of who stays, right? So does Agyemang get a longer run out? I hope we'll see Diego Luna from the start. He came off the bench the other day. He was another one that Poch was asked about yesterday and talked about extensively, but a little bit more, I guess, measured, because it sounds like they've had conversations about positional discipline and what's his best position in the system and where's he most comfortable, and can he be creative and incisive in the attacking end without neglecting the positional play responsibilities and his defensive duties. So I'm hoping to see more of Moonboy for sure. And then who else, that you start to see a little bit of a window into what the coaches saw on the training ground in the terms of the decisions they make, the minutes they dole out and how they do that and who gets it and where. So, maybe Indiana Vasilev, someone like that, we'll get a longer look at. So it's just kind of that same idea, is is this going to be a coherent performance? Which individuals stand out? How does the collective empower the individual, right? Because it's much easier to look at as a single player if the group around you is doing well and the system is working right. And then does it's often a loss of coherence after the hour mark or so, right? As the second half unfolds, does the things get choppy and ugly, or do the individuals and their relationships within that sort of build something that works better and find a way to rise above that and still be interesting and productive and pretty, so just hope for some good soccer. That there's been a lot of choppy, ugly January friendlies over the years, and I think you got to give thanks for a game even like the other day. Of course, it wasn't perfect, but we had some goals, we had some interesting passages of play, and then again, I just posted on Blue Sky about how, at least so far, how open Pochettino has been with his remarks to the media. I think he's doesn't seem to be as guarded maybe as a lot of top level international managers tend to be or want to be with what he's saying right now. And granted, the stakes are relatively low, and maybe that'll change as competitive games arrive. But I just love listening to this guy talk, and in both languages. I'm finally getting to a point where I can understand most of what he's saying in Spanish, and he's just a really thoughtful guy, and it's been a fun journey so far, I think, from that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, look, he has a shorter run up than most international managers going into a World Cup, and he has a lot of work to do quickly. And I give him all the credit in the world of the things he said and the performances on the field so far. And yes, I think let's just have another fun, pretty game. For me as an NYCFC fan, I'd love to see Matt Freese get a little run in net, but that's me being a little selfish on that end there.
Very much the same for me. I mean, I think he's head and shoulders the most deserving goalkeeper, especially when you look at his trajectory, his path to this point. So I do hope we get a look, because I think it was Matt Doyle who made a point that I very much agree with when the roster came out, that if there's anyone on this roster that could fast track into real conversation, not only for making the 2026 squad, but potentially playing, I think it's Freese.
I know the goalkeeper position's it's an interesting one. It was. For a while, I feel like it was Stefan and Turner. They were both playing. It was great. And then it all just kind of fell apart a little bit. And now we don't really have, a goalkeeper playing at the, quote unquote, high level that you want to see for a World Cup. But I don't know. There's a million different ways I feel like the conversation can go for an hour about a goalkeeper situation. But I do want to transition us over from the USMNT side of things to the MLS side of things. And this offseason has been, to me, a little bit more interesting, or maybe a little bit more influential, I feel, than what we've seen over the last few years. Not to say, Messi wasn't an off-season move, but whatever. Previous transfer windows and off-seasons have been a little less, I feel like, compared to what we've seen now with, I feel like, heading into a little bit more of understanding the traditional 3DP, 3U22 roster build, or the 2DP for, U22 spots with that game. And in terms of now this new tool of the internal transfer market, I think this is a little bit of a light version of it and a test version of it. But what do you make of right now the state of the roster build of MLS? I've been watching this league and following this league since 2014, 2015. I was a little bit of a late bloomer into it. But the transition from then to now is incredible. I can't imagine that even, people who are watching the league back in 96 or 2000 to this point is like, what is this, to an extent? What do you think that maybe some of these new mechanisms or some of these new things that Major League Soccer are testing out can really impact 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, and maybe it helps to make the transition. If I point out too, I think this is an aspect even of the MNT discourse that gets lost sometimes, because we so often find ourselves comparing domestic-based players in MLS to the top dogs who are playing over in the big spotlights of Europe. And of course, again, there's inevitably some level of implicit or explicit comparisons between Pochettino and Klinsmann. But when I look back at what some of the stuff that, looking back on Klinsmann's era, that's now been what he was fired in late 2016. So we're now, 8+ years on from that tenure. and we shouldn't be having the same kind of conversation because it's not the same league. Like, we have
Yeah.
to acknowledge that. And Poch has said this too, like the league made huge strides. And I know that a lot of observers hear that kind of thing all the time, and it can sound very much like PR speak or marketing speak, but it's true. Like, this league is evolving rapidly, and there is, while of course we can always debate whether it should be happening faster, if the structure of the league is sort of a handbrake on the speed with which money flows into it, and ambition grows and investment grows. It's still happening, even if you don't like the speed at which it's happening. Teams are spending. Teams are stretching their legs in terms of their perception of what's possible. And then there's just diversity. The diversity of roster building approaches, the ethos that you see. This was once a league that was owned by, half a dozen or fewer dudes, right? Being basically, you can fit the board of directors meeting into a large closet. Now you have 30 different ownership groups with a lot of different perceptions and sort of sensibilities from across the world. I've written a lot about San Diego FC lately. As much as people may look at that brand, that name and brand and crest as real generic looking, like, there's actually a super unique backstory and philosophy to how they want to do things, which is, that's just one of 30. And I think as carefully and as much as consensus is really valued to an extreme in terms of how the league makes decisions and takes the tangible steps of changing rules and opening up restrictions, it's still happening. And I think that's the context in which I perceive the cash trade market growing. It's just opening up the number of pathways by which teams can build their squads, change their squads, deal with situations. And in the long run, in the bigger picture, it helps players too. I mean, there's more ways for players to get paid. There's more ways for players to find the right spot or get out of a bad situation. And I think, as the homie Tom Bogert has talked about and written about, I think the two sort of canaries in the coal mine for this new mechanism are Evander and Lucho Acosta, and everybody's waiting to see, what happens with those two sort of disgruntled star playmakers, and whether that's the mechanism by which those situations are resolved, or if it's something else. But I just think you have to give CSOs and the other people who are making decisions at a club level the most flexibility, the most freedom to do what they think is right to be competitive.
What's funny is, after the Evander social media meltdown that happened, after the playoff loss, I remember
the content, Evander. We appreciate that.
We love the content. We love the stories. We love the content, which I do think, honestly, Major League Soccer benefits from having stories, just like the Premier League and La Liga and everything else does. But I remember putting out there, if I'm a general manager of an MLS club, and this was before I think any news even kind of broke about a potential internal transfer market, I was like, I'm picking up the phone and I'm just seeing. No, there was no way, right? There was no mechanism of an MLS club being able to send enough GAM that would even remotely match what a club in Brazil, Argentina, whatever, Saudi Arabia might match for an Evander. But I was like, if I'm a general manager of a club, it would kill me not to even just pick up a phone and be like, hey, what would this cost? Is there even a possibility? And now that possibility exists, it's almost, I think this has a larger effect than people might take this as two players can be traded for cash, two players can be acquired for cash, all that stuff. And I look at a Talis Magno, right, an NYCFC fan again, of just like, maybe a loan down to Brazil wasn't the option. Maybe if things weren't working out under Cushing, and an MLS club's like, we'll pay, I don't know, 10 million for Talis Magno because we see the talent, we see he can fit into our system. It's so fun to me. In my brain, I think of 10 million different trades that could happen. And that's just, again, going down the US soccer nerdiness there. But I think, to the other point that you made, MLS clubs are now unique. And I think there wasn't always a time where MLS clubs or MLS roster builds or how teams played was unique, right? Like, you can look at the big example of Columbus Crew, Wilfred Nancy, how they play, everything like that. But to your point, San Diego, and I've been like, I read your most recent article on San Diego, and it feels real now. San Diego feels like something we can actually talk about. The roster's built out more. There's training sessions. Players are reporting to camp and everything like that. What do you make of your conversations around people with San Diego, what you're seeing with San Diego, and maybe where this year one could look like in terms of recent expansion seasons, excuse me, like St. Louis, Charlotte, Austin, etc.?
Yeah, it's, I mean, I think the floor and the ceiling are both, you know, pretty substantial.
Yeah.
High ceiling, low floor situation here, because there's a lot of unknowns, and part of that is the roster construction model and the development ethos behind the club itself. So just for those who haven't followed this, you know, their main owner is a very rich British gentleman named Mansour, who is also the, I think, majority investor in Right to Dream, which is a really fascinating story. Sort of what's now a sort of global network of clubs. It started with an English guy in Ghana who saw incredible amounts of talent, but also, you know, the grinding nature of the poverty and the difficulties that these kids had in terms of not just getting out and reaching their best level with soccer, but in life, right? And the challenges with accessing education, and so he launched this program that basically sought to provide higher level coaching for young kids in Ghana, and now they've grown into, I think, Egypt and elsewhere, and also provided them with tools for life, with education and life skills, and a sort of a philosophy underneath it, to try and prepare them to be good human beings, regardless of where their soccer careers went. And I think I started to see these kids that were, you know, some of them were provided with pathways and opportunities to pursue a professional career in Europe. Others were started coming to the United States and you know, finding opportunities to get scholarships to go to high schools and then colleges. And, you know, if you followed MLS on any level for any amount of time, you know a lot of the guys we're talking about here, Emma Boateng, David Akam, like there's a long list. A lot of them are guys who came here as adolescents, you know, thrived within the whether it was a private academy or whatever, and then got into NCAA soccer and then came into MLS through the draft. And you could sort of see, I mean, I first spotted them when back in the days, going back a decade or so, when I was covering a lot of youth soccer, and I would go to like a big soccer tournament, like a showcase tournament, like the Jefferson Cup down the road from me. I live in DC, and this is a tournament in Richmond, Virginia. And you would see these kids who were much less like kids, right? They were the same age as the guys and girls around them in these environments, but were just much more mature and were just stood out in terms of their ability and on the pitch. And then you dig in a little bit more, and they're incredible human beings in general as well. And so now Right to Dream is basically the global provider and partner for San Diego SC's curriculum and whole way of doing things. So they're building not just a training facility and an academy, but a residential component, an educational component at that academy on tribal land. There's a Native American tribe that's part owners as well of the club. And so from the jump, they've invested huge money, not just into the expansion fee, but into the infrastructure to grow players, right? And they want to recruit the best talent, not just in that part of Southern California, but across the border in Tijuana and the environs, because they are within the border radius that FIFA lays out as where clubs are allowed to recruit across national borders. And so Article 14 is not an issue for them. So now they could conceivably try and appeal to top prospects in Mexico, in California, and then they want to also connect with the prospects that are coming out of the other Right to Dream academies in Europe and Africa. So you start to see almost like a youth-oriented CFG, City Football Group or Red Bull Global, And that's, that we're not going to see that for a while, because the academy, stuff takes a while to bake, and the first academy crop will start reporting to San Diego FC in August. But it's really intriguing to me to this idea that these guys want to take everything that the likes of Philadelphia Union and FC Dallas and the pace setters at the academy level in MLS are doing, and ramp it up to another level and internationalize it. And I think even if you're not that into MLS, if you're just coming at it from a USMNT fandom, that should have your attention.
I mean, one, I think the Right to Dream, what they do on a global scale is unbelievable for, I think everyone involved, from the young players to the players who are breaking into opportunities. And I, hand up, I don't know as much as the Right to Dream Academy as I probably should, but I would also assume maybe even at a coaching level or at a scouting level and stuff, kind of all in between, right? And I think I'm a big fan of the city of San Diego. I just went there last year with my wife and had an unbelievable trip. And we are going to be going back this year. I think to do that in one of the most beautiful cities in America as well is a pretty nice addition to the MLS circle, right? And
Yeah.
Charles, I want to finish up the conversation with you today in just this offseason, again, outside of cash for trade players, outside of an expansion team and everything like that, has already been insane. We've had Neymar rumors that obviously I don't think are going to be coming true at any time soon, maybe ever. But what's one move that stands out to you? Obviously, we just had Wilfred Zaha get confirmed today. Jonathan Bamba a few days ago. We saw Jesus Ferreira and Paul Arriola get sent from Dallas to Seattle. What's a move that, whether it's big or small, kind of just stands out to you, and this could be impactful for 2025?
Oof. I could go in several different directions there.
It's a difficult question. It's a difficult question.
And there's so damn many teams now that there's 30 different avenues here, really. But I'll go with one of the ones you mentioned. I think what the Seattle Sounders are doing is very interesting, and the fact that Arriola is gonna, I think, a low-key a very smart acquisition, but I guess their headliner is Jesus Ferreira, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what the Sounders are doing is both familiar and new, in the sense that they are, as they have for a long time now, they have valued continuity, culture in what they do. They truly don't, have to rebuild. Generally, they reload, and they've done it by elevating the value of MLS experience, which is decidedly less sexy than going out and getting yourself into Neymar conversations or splashing millions of dollars on the global market. Mm-hmm. Because, and again, this gets back to the incentive structure that we sort of touched on a little bit in terms of the previous talk about MLS, right? The way that the cash trades sort of outlet now exists, because I think they realized that the existing rules were incentivizing selling top talent abroad rather than creating a market for it to stay within the league. And by the same token, now the Sounders are saying, look, like, players who we know can produce in MLS they give us so many fewer variables to think about and worry about. And it's for me, it's very symbolic and fitting that Jesus Ferreira is the poster child of their offseason activity in this sense, because he is a trendsetter himself, or a trailblazer, because he's one of the first, I think he may be the first player in MLS history to go from academy to homegrown contract to designated, first team to designated player contract. And now he's moving within the league. And while a USMNT fan would have preferred maybe to see him go to Europe a year or two or three ago, or even now, I don't think he's given up on that, but his sort of prime window for being a valuable prospect in the European eye has passed. But Seattle is saying, like, this guy can produce in this league. We know it. We think he can solve problems and fill a hole for us. And he's willing to bet on himself in that sense too, and continue what I think is sort of a rare trajectory for a domestic player. So I'm very intrigued to see where all that goes.
Jesus Ferreira's story, his path is I think it's one of one to an extent, right? Like you mentioned, I know he's definitely the first player to go from homegrown to DP. I don't know about the academy aspect, but it doesn't matter. Probably true, whatever. But he's just such a unique player, right? I think there's been positional arguments about him. Is he USMNT quality? Isn't he? The connection, I think, to his family within this league as well. There's such a unique story about Jesus Ferreira, and I mean his talent's unbelievable. I think putting him under Brian Schmetzer, putting him with other USMNT players up in Seattle, and giving him an opportunity, I think, to star at a Club World Cup, to star in a CONCACAF Champions Cup, and the Seattle opportunity just makes so much sense. Yes, it's not Europe, but he has now an opportunity at a global scale to show off his skill, show off his ability, play at a higher level. No shot at Dallas there. Seattle is at a higher level than Dallas right now, and do it in multiple competitions in multiple ways. So I'm excited to see what that looks like for 2025. I do think that he could be a player, and obviously the addition of Areola as well could be a move that I think elevates Seattle. Well, not think. I'm going to say elevates Seattle very much clearly into a potential MLS Cup favorite, even if we're just talking Western Conference, right? So I think that's an unbelievable move to end things off on. Charles, I want to give you obviously the opportunity, if someone's listening to this podcast, if someone's watching this or whatever, they know your work, they know it's all on MLSsoccer.com, but obviously plug whatever you want to plug and, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong going to the author page on the mothership, MLSsoccer.com. I'm also spending most of my social media time on Blue Sky these days. So Musk's Twitter is not it's no longer my groove, yeah. But so if you're not on Blue Sky yet, come and join us. I found it to be a much superior experience, and I'm trying to do more Instagram stuff this year. That's one of my resolutions, and then we'll see. I have a few other ideas that are in the still idea stage, but hopefully can do some fun new stuff in the year to come as well.
No, that's all fun. And obviously I think the article that you mentioned, or the idea you mentioned around speaking with that FC Dallas scout and everything like that, I'm interested in that. The super draft is, like we mentioned before, a unique MLS US soccer thing. So I can't wait to read that. But Charles, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Yeah, great chopping it up with you, Tom. Thanks for having me.
All right.